Yes, everybody, welcome back to Talking Wolves. We're here for a brand new match preview on the channel. Hope you guys are keeping well. We're back in Premier League action this week after a fantastic win in the FA Cup. Wolves officially FA Cup quarter-finalists, but all the focus now back on the league as Wolves can continue to push potentially for a European spot. We'll talk about that and more ahead of this game at St James's Park. Before we do, please go and check out our channel partners over at Football Prize. He's got a fantastic prize up for grabs this week. It's a signed and framed Nelson Semedo shirt for your chance to win it. Get involved in their prize draw, which ends next Wednesday, but the link will be in the top of the description of this video. But Wolves back on their travels again as we face off against Newcastle, not Brighton. We played Brighton this week and obviously got the 1-0 win there. I think Gary O'Neill would be very, very satisfied with that win. Probably more than satisfied, really, because if you looked at the lineup from that team, probably wasn't it wasn't Wolves' strongest lineup. So the fact that he was able to rotate and you could arguably say rest players and still come out with a win is a real big positive for Wolves. The only sort of downside to it is potential players out from that game, which I'll talk about in a minute, but Wolves did really well. In terms of the overall quality of performance, probably still wasn't quite where we want it to be, but ultimately got the winning goal very, very early on. Atmosphere was fantastic throughout the majority of the second half, and sort of sat deep, frustrated Brighton, and restricted them, to be honest, to very, very few clear-cut chances, and created one or two of our own. So into the next round of the FA Cup against Coventry. Obviously, we're not into the semi-final yet, but we've probably got the best draw and the most favourable draw out of anyone. So a very, very good opportunity for Wolves to get to Wembley. But of course, we'll talk about that more probably on the podcast next week and going forward over the next couple of weeks as well. But like I said, players coming out of that game. Gary O'Neill commented on his post-match press conference about Hwang Hee-chan, who came off limping towards about half an hour, 35 minutes to go. Unfortunately, sounds like he's got a hamstring issue. He says he's not as bad as the Neto injuries from previously and the Cunha injury, but he'd be very, very surprised to see Hwang in the squad for the game against Newcastle on Saturday. So Hwang Hee-chan pretty much out of this game. And that will raise a few question marks for me over the style of play, or at least the lineup for Saturday as well, which I'll get into shortly. Very quickly, I'll flag up the Premier League table on the screen. It's looking very, very decent, and there's some cracking games and cracking fixtures between now and the end of the season. Look, there's still a long way to go. 12 Premier League games left, including this one against Newcastle United. But these are the games that we have to start winning if Wolves want to finish higher in the table and potentially go for a late dash for European football. Currently sat on 38 points, one place and 1 point ahead of this weekend's opposition, Newcastle. Ahead of us are West Ham and Brighton by 1 point. We do have a much better goal difference than West Ham, but Brighton have a stronger goal difference than us. And of course, Wolves scoring 40 goals, which is the first time we've scored that many goals at this stage in the campaign, in a top flight campaign for a long, long time. We've still got West Ham to play at home. Of course, we've still got to play Newcastle as well. So there's some pretty favourable home fixtures. So it's all about the consistency between now and the end of the season. Look, this time in August, we were never ever going to be having this conversation. No one thought this could be possible with the state that the squad was left in when Julian Lopetegui left. So for us to be having this conversation, of course, is fantastic. But the unity and the cohesion and the momentum that this squad has got at the moment, genuinely anything is possible. But if we don't get it through the league, we'll just have to make sure we win the FA Cup to qualify for Europe anyway, won't we? Looking at my predicted lineup though, guys, for this game, it's interesting because with the way that Gary O'Neill lined up yesterday, it could raise a couple of different options. And let me know in the comment section which you guys think is best out of these lineups and which one you would possibly go for. Firstly, the lineup that I think it will be. Now, I feel very bad not to include Santi Bueno because every time he's come in recent times, in the FA Cup and since sort of December, he's been very, very good. But I just think that Gary O'Neill is going to sort of go with his tried and tested Premier League team, I should say. So I think Jose Sarr in goal, Ait Nouri, Semedo, Kilman, Dawson, Totti, João Gomez and Lemina again. Both of those have been fantastic the last couple of weeks. And then a front three of Pedro Neto, Pablo Sarabia, and Jean-Rickner Bellegarde with the injury of Hwang. I thought Bellegarde again was okay as well against Brighton this week in the FA Cup. The other option I think could be something like this. Now, we've not really seen Wolves play like this up until yesterday, and I actually thought it worked quite well. And it'd be interesting to see maybe with Sarabia and Neto as the front two for me in this one. With Tommy Doyle basically coming in, because I thought Tommy Doyle was great. Tommy Doyle was very, very good against Brighton as well, so it would almost feel bad to drop him. So same back five and goalkeeper, but Tommy Doyle sitting in with Lemina and João Gomez, and then a free roll pretty much for Pablo Sarabia and Pedro Neto up top. So I'll be very interested. I think Newcastle are already worried about the midfield battle. So I think the Lemina João Gomez one would still work okay. But having that bite to the midfield three, I suppose it may seem a little bit more negative, I suppose. But I don't know. I'll be very intrigued to see what you guys think in the comment section down below on which lineup Wolves should go for out of those. But to get the Newcastle perspective, I spoke to a good friend of mine, Paul Madden, from the Irish Mags podcast, to get his thoughts on Newcastle and their season so far. So then, guys, delighted to be alongside Paul Madden from the Irish Mags podcast. Matt, how you keeping, mate?
Yeah, not too bad, man. I mean, you're calling me mad. That's a football manager reference, but it's Paul in the real world, isn't it?
I know.
Yeah, not too bad.
Yeah, me and Paul / Mad, we do another podcast together, but it's always good to get, obviously, someone that you know personally, and obviously another podcaster involved as well. It's weird me calling you Paul, but I suppose I've got to do it for...
It's like you sound like my mother, Dave, but it's quite enjoyable, actually.
We're looking ahead at Newcastle Wolves back in Premier League action. Both teams getting wins in the FA Cup during the week, although you guys probably made slightly harder work of it than Wolves did, but you're through nonetheless. What's the sort of thoughts and feeling around Newcastle at the moment, man? Because I'm looking, and I spoke to a couple of Newcastle fans already doing different bits, and it's quite doom and gloom and quite negative, which is it's mad really considering the position you are in the table, I would say.
It's a funny one. I mean, we were arguably very spoiled after last year, the Champions League qualification. Arguably an overachievement. It helped that Liverpool had a struggle last year, Spurs, obviously Chelsea. So we definitely took advantage of that. We haven't, in comparison to last year, we're not that far away where we were in terms of points and all that. But we've just, where last year we were grinding out results or picking up draws, we've just lost more games, and then that home form has definitely dipped, which will be music to all of the Talking Wolves listeners, because you're obviously travelling to St. James's at the weekend, as am I. I feel like where we were a confidence team, and that was our thing, right? You were coming out with this belief that, like, no matter who the opponent is, we can dominate them in terms of fitness, in terms of the press, the football. I think a lot of things have probably just kind of smashed that confidence.
Yeah.
A lot of banter on the Twitter because of the FA Cup draw we've just got, but that's just like adding another layer on the bad luck we've had in the draws. Like in the Carabao, we've had Man United, Man City, Chelsea. Champions League, we've all seen how that transpired, the hardest group of death you'll find. And now we've picked up City away. So there's that kind of like, God, everything's against us. And then everyone's complaining about injuries, but like we literally were in a place where we've been playing the same three midfielders, for maybe 95% of the last 15 games in the league.
Yeah.
And it's almost like every time we've come into a game, we've left with another injury. And we're at the point where, like against Arsenal, obviously the result was terrible, but we were just happy that Isak completed 70 minutes without getting injured. Like that's where we are now. So I just feel like all of these things have kind of built up and almost like taken that confidence away. So it's almost like we're not going out into the pitch with the same level of confidence. And then obviously some individual players getting scrutinised. And I think equally, like, there's gaps in this Newcastle team that either weren't there last year or teams have started to actually spot and see and take advantage of. We've got gaps in our midfield without having a solid six there. As good as Longstaff and Miley have been, and their local lads, it's not really a comparison to what Joe Linton, Joe Willock, and even if we'd had Tonali for longer than the 10 minutes we've got to see him for. So there's gaps there. Dan Burns has been exposed. So I just think there's a lot of confidence gone out of the team. And if I wanted to be critical, there's a lot of talk about Eddie has a plan A, but he doesn't have a plan B. And
Yeah.
again, when the going gets tough, we've not managed to turn games around, which is tough to take.
Yeah, I think, and this isn't just for Newcastle in general. I think football fans in general are very fickle. Whether you support Newcastle, whether you
Mm.
support Wolves or whatever, but as a club, and when you set yourself such a high standard like Newcastle did last year, and I think it would have been a lot easier to take. Say, for argument's sake, last year you qualified for the Conference or the Europa League. Being where you are now, it'd probably be a bit more acceptable. But you sort of went to the top, really, got Champions League, and really it's very, very hard to replicate that, unless you're amongst those big boys. It's going to be
Mm.
hard to do that. So I think that was difficult, and that's made Eddie Howe's job even more tricky, because he's set himself such a high standard. He's got to continue doing that as well. There has been, I don't think there's any danger on his immediate future, Mad, but I would assume if Wolves get the 3 points this weekend, that'll add even more pressure onto him. And could the atmosphere and could the feeling at St James's turn quite toxic if 5 p.m. on Saturday you haven't got all 3 points or even a point?
Yeah, like again, apparently the club have said they've not released a statement. You see some of the Newcastle journalists saying, they're reiterating the belief in Eddie Howe is there. He's there for the long term. He's the man they believe in the long term project,
Yeah,
and he's proven he can do it. Right. The challenge you have is, no matter what was going wrong. I mean, I feel like a lot of people saying things took a turn when Nick Pope picked up his injury. Things took a turn when we had that scandalous VAR decision against PSG and Tino Livramento on the handball.
oh,
And that's where things turned. But where we were was we always have our home form. Nobody wants to come to St. James's Park. And you kind of think at least that's the constant. And that's where we'll pick up points. And when we go on the road, yeah, it's going to be tough against City, Arsenal, whoever. But we can still pick up points. We then lost to Forest on, was it Boxing Day, St. Stephen's Day, as we call it in here in Ireland, to Forest at home. And then we've had draws against Bournemouth and Luton at home. So it's not where we were like super confident would be St. James's Park, and that's starting to get a bit shaky. So it would worry me, not so much that Eddie Howe is in trouble if we think of the big picture, right? But it would worry me that the fans would get very overexcited in a negative way, because you're suddenly looking at, any Newcastle fan, if you were to meet them on the street or at the weekend, they'll expect to go and beat Wolves in St James's Park, right? There's
yeah,
no doubt about that. Even though Wolves are a good side and gave us a good game earlier in the season. But that's not what Newcastle's about, especially when you think of St James's Park atmosphere. You need it to be rocking. We've had far too much games and weeks over the last few years. Steve Bruce out, we've had multiple different managers, Mike Ashley out, negative atmospheres. And, in terms of the Irish Mag, so obviously we're the Irish Mag supporters group. Like there's been years there where a lot of us probably weren't traveling because it costs a lot of money and you got to look at hotels and you're giving up your whole week. Like you got to go for 2 days and like that wasn't happening as much. So where we are now is that the atmosphere, the fans buying into what we're doing and what Eddie's doing is what makes us strong. And I'd hate to think that what is now a longer blip than we'd want could change that, because at the end of the day, if we don't have that St James's Park rocking thing, again, you're kind of like, what are we falling back to? And yeah, you said it earlier as well, Dave. Like we had a very good season last season and spoiled, overachieved, all these words that go around, and everyone would expect then you build from there. The only way is
yeah,
up, and we've learned the hard way that FFP, PCR, whatever you want to call it,
that was cool.
has prevented us from doing that. We made two really expensive signings in the summer, Tonali and Barnes. Obviously, as we all know, Tonali out for 10 months with that ban until next August. Barnes had the strangest broken toe injury, and he's literally just back. He's not sharp. He's not fit. So like that, they were the marquee signings. Maybe not as big as people wanted, but good players
Yeah,
that we've not had either. And then throw in all these injuries. There's games where we're going out, we don't have a striker because Wilson and Isaac haven't rarely, if ever, been fit at the same time. So piling all these things together, they sound like excuses. But what they are is arguably a series of unfortunate events adapting to life with way more games in the season than we've ever
yeah,
had. And I do think we need to be realistic. Where we are right now is where we would have been happy last season. And I think that we need to keep that in mind. I think the owners and the directors are more than sensible enough not to get panicked. in that situation, and just a bit of patience till the summer because we know we'll have a bit more flexibility to spend.
Yeah, all I was going to say, I mean, you've mentioned there, you've had two key players, two marquee signings that you've been without for majority of the season.
Mm.
You've had a lot of
Mm.
injuries. I think depends. It'll be interesting to see how obviously the Saudi owners and sort of how they deal with that, because there would be in times gone by owners that rush and would sack Eddie Howe, but ultimately, if they are reasonable people, they'll see the bad luck that he's had with certain things. The betting thing with Tonali's out of control. Certain injuries
Mm.
are out of your control. So, I think almost you hate to say it in football, but almost to write off the season. But to be honest, Newcastle are still in a very, very decent position and on out of the conversation for Europe. We've just creeped ahead of you guys in the Premier League table, but it's still very, very close. And I feel it could go sort of either way at the weekend as well. In terms of players, Mad, that are going to be available that Wolves need to be looking out for, are there any sort of players that you're really expecting to shine on Saturday for Newcastle? Or are capable of
This,
winning Newcastle the game?
yeah, I usually say kind of a couple of things ahead of games. The kind of first and foremost is usually if Bruno is on his game, he kind of
Yeah.
runs the game. We've seen that
Yeah.
multiple times in the season. The one little asterisk there is he's on. I think he's on 9 yellow cards,
All right.
and
Okay.
we've been so stretched. Joe Willock is just back. He started his first game against Blackburn in the FA Cup. Joe Linton is pretty much out for the season, so there's definitely been that on the mind because he's not been as tenacious. He loves a challenge, he loves a tackle, and he plays on the edge, right? But if Bruno's pulling the strings, we generally do very well. And the other thing that I really kind of notice or believe firmly is in Alexander Isak.
Mhm.
Again, he's only just back from an injury. He hasn't been fully fit, I think, since coming back. We've been forced to play him. He's barely strung 90 minutes together. If he actually hasn't strung 90 minutes together this year. And he came back and then was gone again. He came off 2-3 weeks ago. He's got a groin issue. I would imagine surgery in the summer. But and again, your listeners might not like to hear this. Isak's due a game and a goal. And, as I said to you there, he played against Arsenal. He played against Blackburn. Didn't get as much of the ball as you'd like to see. So because of that, I feel like, he's due a game. And quite often when he plays well, when he scores more than one. So that for me, would be a big one. And the final thing would be Anthony Gordon. He's been probably our best player all season consistently. He hasn't been injured, and he's been our biggest threat going forward. And the energy, the pace, it'll baffle me if he's not in that Euro squad in the summer. Baffle me. Not in a very impartial and non-biased way.
Yeah, I felt he's kicked on a lot. I've always felt mainly when he was at Everton, really, because we've only played him once, playing for you guys. But we always kept him quite quiet, Anthony Gordon, or at least he didn't have very good games against us. And I felt we did okay against him at Molineux as well. But I think he has had a very good season in terms of goal contributions as well. You'll
Yeah.
watch him more than I do, but in terms of goal contributions, he's really kicked on. It's turning out that's turned out to be quite a clever signing for you guys as well. On the
Yeah.
flip side of that, Mad, looking at Wolves, I know there's probably one name that you're going to mention, but are there any players that going into this game that you sort of worried about facing off against on Saturday from the Wolves side?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is Pedro Neto. And there's been a lot of talk that Newcastle are admirers of him. I even saw recently the Man City are actually admirers
Yeah,
of
Man
Pedro
City,
Neto.
Man City
Arsenal
looking
have been
likely.
in
Yeah.
talks before.
Mm.
So he was very good against us earlier in the season. And where we are now, like Eddie Howe is in this place where he's always had faith in Dan Burn. And we talk about this on the Irish Mags podcast, that he likes Dan Burn because of his the aerial ability he can tuck
Yeah.
in. You and I know all about the inverted fullback, Dave, but he likes what he can offer in that sense. Tucking in alongside Botman or Share allows Trippier to then push on, and Trippier recently has been tucking in the middle as well to give us a bit extra cover in midfield. But that said, against fast players, and this has happened to us against Forest, like when they had Elanga up against Dan Burn, like these lightning fast players, Dan Burn is slow to turn, and if he gets caught in any way, he's not catching up, obviously, right? So yeah, I feel Pedro Neto is definitely a big danger there, for sure. I'm a big Ryan Ait-Nouri fan,
Yeah.
and in terms of overloads, like Trippier loves to push on, as we've seen, and is obviously main set piece taker. So he spends a lot of time in, let's say, the opposition half, and then has to obviously run back. And it's easy for me to say this, but he's not a young man, even though I'm far older than him. Um, I'd also be wary of that because of the energy of Ryan Aït-Nouri. He gets forward so much,
I felt
and
he did.
I suppose
I
like
felt he did well against Trippier last time as well at Molineux. I
yeah,
felt he
yeah, he
turned
did,
him a
yeah,
couple of times early doors
yeah,
as
yeah.
well, didn't he?
He was very good. I think I was even texting you because he was
Mm.
really standing out, and I've been a fan for him for a long time. So that would make me a bit wary. The double threat there of Aït-Nouri pushing on, overloading on the left, if Trippier is kind of in an advanced position, and then as I said, Pedro Neto. And looks like you've got a good little player in Zhao in the middle as well. He's
Joe Gomez,
picked
yeah.
up a couple of goals. Yeah, yeah, a bit of a baller there, and yeah, so we're probably not as confident as we'd usually be at home against Wolves. One, because Wolves are doing well, but two, because our home
Mm.
form has been a bit sketchy.
Yeah, I spoke earlier on. I think is it the Chronicle, Newcastle newspaper, is
Mm,
it?
mm,
Yeah. So
mm-hmm.
they do a podcast, and I spoke to one of the guys on there earlier, and he said he put a post out, and the just pure negativity from Newcastle fans. Not so much negativity, but let's say lack of confidence going into this game. He said he got
Yeah.
about 50 responses, and probably 9/10 of those are fans thinking that Wolves are going to go and grab all 3 points, which really surprised me because I think you've not been awful. You still had some level of form. And although
Mm-hmm.
we're winning games, we probably haven't been as comfortable as we would have wanted to be in these games. So I genuinely do think it will be a closer game than at least Newcastle fans expect. But what's the aim, Ad? Is between now and the end of the season for Newcastle fans? Is it just to make sure it's a top half finish, or is Europe the aim? I'd assume it's probably similar to us, where if you can get any further in the FA Cup as well, would be nice.
Yeah, I think like if I'm to go really, really short term, we've been conceding the craziest amount compared to last season where we were like level with Man City for goals conceded.
Mm,
We now have the worst defensive record in the Premier League, particularly
wow.
since Nick Pope got injured. It's not just because
Yeah.
Pope has been out, but it's almost like the whole thing. Botman was out, and even Botman now, he hasn't been 100% fit. He's been definitely off the pace, slower on the turn, and stuff like that. Considering he's
Mm,
normally so solid, he's like the cliche of a Rolls Royce defender, but that's what's commonly used for Botman. But we need to stop conceding goals, right? I mean, it's bad enough we don't have strikers available who are injured all the time that we can't score,
mm,
but we're never going to win if we keep conceding, and we've been really, really poor in that sense. And that's a system issue. It's not just the keeper. Like Dubravka kept us in it against Blackburn in the FA Cup during the week. Karius actually wasn't bad against Arsenal, but that just shows you we've already had our third choice keeper play in the league this season as well. It's just more on top of
So
more.
is Dubravka
Um,
back? Was he injured last week? Was
Dubravka's
he?
back. Yeah,
Okay,
Dubravka was
so,
sick. He was sick for Arsenal, and then he was back in goals for Blackburn. He actually played really well. Some crazy good
mm,
saves, which is positive, which is promising. Um, so yeah, we need to stop leaking goals. But to go back on the point of objective now for the season, there's like Europe is definitely still on the table, no matter what way you look at it. You win 2 games out of 3, and suddenly you're back in 7th, and then
yeah.
Man United are obviously a little bit shaky now. All of a sudden, they might drop some points. It's there for taking West Ham, up 1 week, down the next week. So the competition is fierce, but again, it can switch around within 2 weeks. The whole thing can turn around. So get back to winning ways starting on Saturday, and just getting a bit of rhythm, a bit of form.
Mm.
Is definitely the main objective for us, and especially because I'm going over, Dave. I really hope it starts on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's go on to that, Mad. What's your score prediction? Maybe one from the head and one for the heart for this one. Make it a bit easy for yourself.
Oh, for 2 of them. Do you know what? Like I'll always believe in Newcastle and St James's Park. I previously had 100% record traveling over to games until I was at the AC Milan final Champions League game
Yeah.
where we were 1-0 up and we lost 2-1. So I firmly believe that we should be walking away with a win. Not an easy one, but I'd probably be looking at a 2-1 realistically.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that would be fair. As I said, we've been conceding goals, but we need to get back to having that stadium rocking so much that Wolves are like, wow, okay, and starting well, obviously as well. So that's probably head and heart together,
Yeah.
with a
I
bit
think
bit of
I think that's
instincts.
sensible. I think that's sensible. I would have said I think both sets of fans, although some may not want to admit it, would probably be happy to walk away with a point if you got offered it now. But I think it'll be a goal either way. I think Wolves could easily. No, So if I
No,
offered
not
you a
me.
point, you wouldn't take it.
No, I wouldn't take it.
Oh, all right. All right.
All or nothing, Dave. All or
We'll
nothing.
just take all. We'll just take all three then. Um,
I've crossed
um,
it.
yeah. Well, I think it could be a goal either way, mate. I think it'll be a very, very close
Mm.
game anyway. But Matt, thank you for jumping on Talking Walls. Where can people find you in the Irish Mags podcast if they wish?
Yeah, I'd say Twitter is probably the best place to start, or X, at Irish Mags NUFC. That's basically on all the socials at Irish Mags NUFC. You can find everything there. Big old community of Irish Newcastle fans that have grown up surrounded by Man United, Arsenal, and Liverpool fans. But yeah, we have a great old group there. We have a WhatsApp group there with over 400 guys in it. We kind of arrange,
Oh, brilliant.
traveling together, getting photos at the airports and stuff. Usually following Shay Given around the airport as well, because he's very often on the same flight to go over and do his pundit work. So yeah, at Irish Mags NUFC is the place to go.
Brilliant. Thank you
All
very
over.
much. And apart from Saturday, mate, all the best for the rest of the season. And I'm sure I'll speak to you very, very soon. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
So a big thanks to Mad and the guys over at the Irish Mags. It's quite a new podcast that they've got out there at the moment. So if you are a Newcastle fan or an Irish football fan or just like to sort of digest football content in general, go and check them out. A link in the description down below. I think my head is saying a 1-1 for this one, guys, but my heart is saying the Dave has a party special 2-1 Wolves win. So I would, a win here, guys, would be fantastic. 4 points breathing space over Newcastle, adds that little bit more pressure on them. From quite a negative point of view and quite a nasty point of view from me, negativity to other teams in and around us could help us out a lot in the long run as well. So puts a lot of pressure on Newcastle. They're just very inconsistent at the moment, and adds 3 points to us to go on to 41 points, which at this stage of the season is just almost unthinkable for us as Wolves fans. So do let me know your thoughts and what you're thinking of my predicted lineups, guys. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Enjoy the rest of your week, and fingers crossed it's 3 points to the Wolves at the weekend, and I'll catch you all very, very soon.